Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, idiot, and loin streamer. And today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to talk about psychology a little bit, and we're going to talk about dark romance as well. But we're going to use dark romance to sort of launch into this other discussion in general that is going to be about a contentious issue, and that is female sexuality and kind of how women might see themselves, or some of what stuff looks like in fiction. And I mostly want to use this as kind of a jumping off board for a larger conversation in general about women and women's sexuality and just the interest in certain things. And I think it's not only to talk about like things that I've been thinking about, things that I've been seeing, but also when it comes to writing characters. I've had people contact me in general asking, what's the best advice for how to write good, authentic characters, especially female characters where it seems like you can never write the female characters correctly. And I think correctly, it depends on who you're talking to. And I think the best advice that I have for anybody in wanting to write richer, deeper, more complex characters in general, not just female characters, but male characters as well, is to try to understand people in general. There is so much nuance around behavior and societal expectations and how we operate with each other and how we think. And I don't know if you guys know this, but I have a master's degree in forensic psychology. I have a strong interest in psychology. And so I have an interest in kind of observing social and psychological interactions and how it changes people and sort of how people become what they are and how society acts. So I want to present this to you. We're going to use dark romance as a jump off board because I started with thinking about that and then I started rabbit trailing into other things. But before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do here on the channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on this channel, check out the links down in the description below. The number one way to be featured is through Lamoy, the monthly prompt writing contest, where I give you a prompt, you write a short story using that prompt, and on the first Monday video of the month, we bask in your creativity because y'all are so different and thoughtful and creative in your own ways. And the second way is if you're an indie author and you have a book out or a book that is coming out, if you submit it to the Fresh Meat feature, just your first chapter and your cover, it'll be right here on the channel to hopefully help more readers find your work. Because while I might not be your reader, I could also possibly be your reader. I've picked up books because of the Fresh Meat feature, but even if I'm not your audience, this is your chance to pitch it at whoever will watch that video, and hopefully more people that are looking for what you do will find you, because that is the hardest part once your book is out there. The third thing is, if you would like to check out any of my books, they're available at any of your favorite places to get books, including the local library upon request. Bodymore Zero is coming out later in October, so keep an eye out for when the arcs go out sometime in the summer. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. It is definitely a character study. Like, there's action, there's more paranormal, there's more supernatural stuff in it in general than I think the other three Bodymores, because Ralph is just in it, but it's also a character study. So with that said, let's jump into the topic. I have a couple of different. Now, just because we're focusing on women today doesn't mean we're not going to cover some other topics later, because I actually have a few articles from years ago that I wanted to talk about and subjects I wanted to talk about. One of them was the intrasexual aggression between men, which I found very fascinating. I actually read that article after I had written Bodymore 2, where you see that intrasexual aggression between Jag and Wayland. And then I was reading the article about the studies on it, and I was like, huh, interesting. And then there's also one about I think it was about men in abusive relationships. But anyway, I think that one of the best things that you can do for yourself as not just an artist or an author, but also kind of a person, is to try to understand these nuances between people. It's really easy to generalize, and we're going to have some generalizations in here in general. Just remember that these are generalizations, and the purpose of this video is to sort of talk about the topic and our different understandings and our different experiences, and try to get a fuller view of what's going on, because I think it is insanely fascinating. But as we also talk about sensitive topics like this, it's important to remember to be respectful. This isn't a chance to like insult anybody, especially when it comes to female sexuality, because you know how difficult it is to talk about this subject, period. It was like 2 weeks ago when I posted that Tampa book review, and we ended up with this commenter right here who said, I think it's just because most women are sex perverts. They want to be raped. They want to be in a harem. They want daddy to screw them. They want to be just a receptacle for cum. They want to outdo other women. all of that stuff and more. They want to do all this nasty stuff while at the same time being triggered and being victims. It's pure insanity. I just don't read anything written by women anymore. Why bother? And like, obviously, you can read whatever you want, but I think we get into a dangerous territory here when you're taking away the agency and complexity of women. And this is something that happens when women also try to talk about these topics, which makes it very difficult to talk about these topics. So we're going to hit a couple of different things. If I get a little bit personal, sorry ahead of time, but I feel like it's almost going to be necessary in some ways to talk about some nuance in this. So the first thing that I actually want to talk about before we get into why has dark romance become so popular? And we're going to read a couple of articles with that, but I would love to know what your thoughts are on why do you think that dark romance has become such a popular genre in the last couple of years? I'm not particularly a fan of it. I don't really read it because I'm not really a fan of sexual content or heavy sexual content and the story just being about sex and abuse, so I generally stay away from it. But there are a couple of trends that I've noticed in reading fiction, especially fiction by women in recent years, and I'm sure that there are many more than I can actually say that I'll actually remember to say right now. But some of those things, especially in stories that revolve around relationships or romance, are that you typically have two archetypes. And this, again, this is a generalization. This is not all stories written by women. I'm just talking about some trends that I've seen because I want to use this as a springboard to sort of go off on because I think it's pertinent to the conversation. So when you have a story that focuses on romance or sexuality with main character as a female, these stories often revolve around one of two types of characters. One type of character is the very virginal, the very pure, the very innocent type, and then every other woman that comes into contact with them is a problem. Usually they're considered slutty, they're considered whores, they're considered evil because of that, and she is considered special because she is pure. That's one type. The other type of story is actually the story that revolves around the woman who is more promiscuous, and then it uses, oh, those other women that waited to get married to have sex or that are virgins still think that they are better than you because they are virgins and we are promiscuous, and so then those women are considered evil. So it's the same thing, but just like swapped, where you're either the promiscuous and the purity is evil, or you're the purity and the promiscuous is evil. And it always and it constantly leans very, very hard into that. They also constantly have this obsession with hurting other women or humiliating other women. I go back to Guns and Smoke because it's like an apex example, where Clara, who is the secondary female character, who is the opponent to the main female character for her love interest, Jesse, she was supposed to marry Jesse. And Jesse talks about how he loved this woman, and then like tragedy struck and they were separated, and he thought that she was dead. And then it turns out she comes into the story later. Well, Bonnie is a jerk to her. Jesse is a jerk to her. She is portrayed as this woman who thinks that she is better than everybody else and all other women because she was waiting until marriage, but she's also evil and she was also selling out other women. And it has to take it to such an extreme. And the story also makes a point of having Jesse and Bonnie humiliate Clara constantly because she's the other woman. And so this got me thinking, it's such a common trope that any secondary females in a lot of these romance books either have to be cheerleaders for the main character, whereas like, you go girl, you go suck that dick, every guy is gonna love you, or she is the opposite, where she has to be constantly humiliated. So validation or humiliation, that is the role of every secondary character in most romance books, and I don't really understand why. And I have been trying to wrap my head around also why there seems to be such an obsession with hurting women, specifically in fiction, humiliating women in fiction. Even the main characters in dark romances are positioned to be humiliated and degraded and belittled. And that's one of the draws, is people who read those books find pleasure in watching the women be used as receptacles and having little self-respect, little agency in some cases, because sometimes they're literally just cum rags. Like the Peter, I'm trying to think of the Peter Pan one. There are a lot of Peter Pan stories that are just pornography where they're getting gangbanged by the Lost Boys and Peter. And how do I know about this? Because I kind of watch videos about this stuff, so I don't have to read the book, but I can know what's going on. I just like to follow trends and conversations, okay? So you've got the jealousy thing. I don't want to dismiss either that a lot of these books have the male character being super super jealous, and so he's going to kill any male character that steps in the way, but then also, punish the female character by subjugating her. And so I wanted to pose the questions like, why do you think that this is so popular? Does it come about in these stories because it bothers men and women more if you're hurting women than if you're hurting men because men are seen as disposable? And I'm not saying that men are disposable, but society in general kind of argues that people are more okay with hurting men than hurting women. And so then in stories, are women sort of the subjects of these degradations as a sort of payback, do you think? Or is it because of a sexual pleasure derived from it after just throwing away men because we're going to do the prolonged torture and humiliation on women? Like, why is that? A second thing with this competitiveness between the virgin and the promiscuous woman is it feels like there is a lot of judgment that goes around in general, whether it is judgment of the self or judgment from one another. I got a story on this. A couple of years ago, I was asked to do a private voice call, video call, whatever, with somebody that I'd done some podcasts with because she just wanted to get to know each other a little more. And during that conversation, just started talking about her experiences and her relationships because she found it very important to have sex and be around sex, and just free love was her thing. That was just her thing. And she talked about going to sex clubs, watching people get plowed, talking to people as they got plowed. She just went on for like 30, 45 minutes telling me about all of her relationships. And she's not the first person that I've met before, the first woman that I've met before that prioritized sex as part of a relationship. I met somebody else who said that she refused to date anybody, go on a second date with any guy that would not have sex with her on the first night because she thought that sexual chemistry was a priority in relationships for her. So if a guy is not going to sleep with her and tell her if they have sexual chemistry, then he wasn't worth pursuing. I disagree with that, but it's not my relationships. It's not my whatever to bother with. So, people can do what they do and believe what they believe and make the lives for themselves that they believe are the correct ways. But so this woman went on unprompted about her sex life without even checking if that was something that I was interested in hearing about. And personally, I think sex and sexual talk, it should stay between the couple that it's happening with. I think it's a private matter. I think it's an intimate matter. And I don't think that it's something that you just kind of throw at random people. I had a different job at a startup company some years ago where the other woman sat across from me on these two tables that were next to each other. There were only 4 employees in the room, and we had to face each other because we were both copy editors. So we were told to sit near each other in case somebody needed something. And instead of just flagging me down when she needed to ask a question about something that we were working on, she would flag me down to pull out my earphones so she could tell me about her genital health and everything that her boyfriend was doing to her at the time. And I didn't want to hear it, but I didn't have too much of a choice because she would not stop talking to me. Anyway, going back to this other woman. So always, if you're going to talk about this kind of stuff, make sure the person you're talking to is on the same page, because I don't think that your sexual life is anybody else's business. But that's just me. And if you enjoy listening to other people talk about their sex lives, that's on you. But double check that that is something that somebody wants to listen to if that's the circle that you're in, and don't pressure other people to share their sex lives. And that's exactly what happened on this phone call. Is she finished talking about her thing, and then she asked me, and then it gets all quiet because I'm not saying anything. And then after a couple of awkward seconds, she goes, "Well, what about you?" And I go, "What about me?" And she goes, "Well, what about your sexual history?" And from there, I explained to her, well, you can live the life that you want to live. There's no problem with that. But personally, I find sex to be something that is very intimate, very personal. It's a spiritual thing that you only do with your husband. And considering I'm not married, that's where my life is. And I feel like that is even more personal than I care to share, because I don't think sexual history is anybody's business. But so I talked about the spiritualness and the intimacy that sex is to me, and how it's a combination of two souls. And so that's why it's something that should be specific to just one person. That's a vulnerability that I believe is specific to be given to one person. And it's always something that I've believed, that I want to be able to, meet my future husband someday and say, I loved you before I even knew you. I kept things to myself so that I could give them only to you, because I think that you were that special before I even met you, because you're the other part of my soul and you gave me that chance, and we're a team together even before we met, because I believe in the sanctity and the spirituality of that connection. And I continually in that conversation said, that's just how I view it. Nobody else has to view it that way. No judgment on you for doing it a different way, but this is just how I operate and the way that I'm going to operate and the way that I'm going to work on my own relationship, should I ever have one. From there, she started defending her way of life, even though I went out of my way specifically to not demonize, to not insult her way of being, specifically to not insult or demonize or belittle her way of being. It's just you live your life and I live my life, and we do things the best way that we believe we can with our beliefs. And still that resulted in judgment. And so I wonder how much of this comes from this idea of feeling insecure or feeling judged or feeling like you have to perform a certain way. And if other people don't perform a certain way, then suddenly it comes back on you. And so anyway, that's just going to be jumping off on this point where is part of this dichotomy in romance and erotica and dark romance of the virgin and the promiscuous, part of like an underlying psychological societal thing that comes out through the mistreatment of other females in a book. Let me know your thoughts, and then let's get into the first article discussing this. It's been a while. So this one is from Booked for Books by Ishita Pant. The word romance is probably a familiar one, but do you know it has a different connotation for each person with a whole variety of meanings? It can be described as a feeling of love or a strong feeling of attraction towards someone. The history of this word dates back to the middle of the 12th century, with its roots lying in France, not as surprising as it is still called the capital of love, a destination still popular for lovers. Back then, it was characterized by chivalrous behavior studied as part of the rich literature for the country has provided to the world. Talking in literary terms, romantic novels have always been in trend, be it with themes of contemporary romance like It Ends With Us, a recent novel by Colleen Hoover, historical romance like in the famous Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, which dates back to 1813, inspirational romance like in Love Comes Softly, written in 1979 by Janet Oakey, or young adult romance that can be witnessed in famous contemporary books such as The Fault in Our Stars and 5 Feet Apart. But a recent development shows that there is a diversion of the readers from the lovey-dovey romance toward the darker side of it. I don't know if I would call Fault in Our Stars lovey-dovey because it's tragedy, right? Because somebody dies with cancer. Dark romance, as people call it these days. Dark romance as a genre has gained a significant following in recent years. It can be considered as a subgenre of romance novels which portrays romantic stories with an element of dark and mature themes. It can further be categorized as an offshoot of romanticism, wherein the writer seeks to explore darker sides of human nature with a focus on the fact that humans are inherently prone to sin even when it comes to love. In true spirit, dark romance has become popular among the reading community of today's generation. Now, the idea that it specifically says of sin, and then I think of stuff like Where's Molly and the other things that are inside of Haunting Adeline, where there were constant references, especially during sex, to like Christianity. It was in Where's Molly. I only know this because I saw a review, okay? The review said that while they're having sex, the one guy says, the chick says, like, oh my God. And then the guy is like, don't call out to God, you call out to me. And if Jesus came back, I would tie him to the cross. I would nail him to the cross and kill him all again. I am your savior. I am your God. And so often this stuff, it seems like there are religious undertones to it or religious references in it where it's not really necessary, which makes it feel like to me that there is some level of rebellion against the idea of abstinence. And we have an article that's going to talk about abstinence culture in the 90s as well, because even though I specifically practice abstinence and believe in it, I don't have any trauma regarding it. I don't have any judgments on other people for not doing it, but it seems like a lot of people are like holding on to something that possibly was instilled in them as teenagers. I don't know. Let me know what you think. In this article, we embark on a journey to discover the reasons for popularity of dark romance in recent times and how contradictory it is to the socially accepted meaning of romance. On one hand, the romance genre is frequently associated with cliché storylines like happily ever after and scenarios where opposites attract. Here is a hidden genre which gives a sneak peek into the reality waiting to be explored by people. Now, I feel like that's such a misnomer. Knowing what I know about dark romance, where it's basically just erotica and literature that has like dangerous characters theoretically in it, it feels like an overstatement of what the genre is when you could just be reading general fiction that has all of these things. Like, it acts like you can't go and explore darker themes, darker ideas, relationships that don't work out in any other form of fiction, but you can. Over the years, the traditional reading community, as well as the publishing trends, favored sweet romance, but it is now that people have started embracing spicy plots with more passion and an increased level of tolerance against violence. Unconditional and taboo relationships, paired with complicated characters and along with a sense of depth and a plot, is what lures the readers now. Times have changed, and people no longer encounter pure romances like in the 90s and before. Rather, they experience gray romances nowadays. To be more precise, characters that are subtly romantic with an extreme sense of possessiveness or characters with a hint of narcissism in them paint a truer picture than that of a paladin. So what they're saying is they want something that's more realistic, but I feel like with what I have heard of the dark romance genre, it is not realistic, it is just extreme. Imagine a main character struggling with past trauma, which makes it difficult for him or her to form an emotional bond, or a character engaging in morally questionable behavior, and yet the reader sympathizes with him. That doesn't just happen in romance! Oh my gosh, you don't need dark romance for that. Look, Casey is such a mess of a character. Wait until you see him, okay? He is not a good person at all. But the book still asks you to sympathize with him, to understand where he is coming from or how he became the person that he became and what he's struggling with. Like, this feels insincere in a way to just act like the only reason that people are being drawn to dark romance is because everything else is idealized, when there are like billions of other genres, not billions, but that's an exaggeration, okay? But there are so many other genres that explore depth and nuance of character that every dark romance I've seen talked about as popular is just extreme violent sex and abusive relationships. It's not this nuanced thing. Am I wrong here? Are there any dark romance readers in the chat? These characters are given such a depth by writers that somehow the readers are continuously drawn toward them despite their flaws, because there is a sense of reality in the form of characters' fears, desires, and passion. Another factor which lures the readers is a display of peculiar situations and emotions, some of which are considered as a taboo in society, yet not so uncommon these days. My favorite is these people that make excuses for romanticizing child erotica or grooming by a father to a daughter. Yeah, those are fun. Think of a story portraying an age gap relationship where one character is significantly older than the other, or between characters who have some sort of authority over one another, like a boss or employee. Readers over here enjoy a sense of risk and fear, but it's certainly enough to keep them hooked. Relationships between people coming from different socioeconomic backgrounds, or between people where both are equally bold characters, this gives a sneak peek into today's reality. That is not what dark romance is. Like, for real. Romanticizing abusive behavior has become quite a trend these days, probably because people nowadays feel that love comes with a price. The psychological themes and challenges depicted in dark romance novels is also something worth applauding. These provide the readers with another level of mental stimulation, and they tend to enjoy the fun ride that they are up for. Since the most important aspects of a good book are development of character and plot, it's easier for people to relate to these stories with their own, or something that they might have seen or heard around. When it comes to love, we have an adherent to hope and beliefs that some of which may or may not come true at any given point. The comfort and the hopes that romantic novels give the readers is incomparable to dark romance, but an experimental basis. Dark romance will definitely top the charts. This does not mean that romance as a genre has digressed. It simply means that although dark romance can be classified as a subset of romance, yet they contradict each other to a great extent. Something about this, I'm thinking, so from what I've known of dark romance, be it Cadence, be it Haunting Adeline and everything related to that, be it the Peter Pan ones, where Wendy becomes the cum rag for all of the boys. Oh yeah, there's also The Wild. What this tells me is it's downplaying what actually sells dark romance. And I don't know if it's because this person is ashamed of what dark romance is, or if they're really naive to what it is, because maybe they are. But then that just takes me back to how The Wild says, oh, it says it's taboo in the in the description. So that means you know what you're in for. But this is literally just saying if you're from different socioeconomic backgrounds or you're a boss and an employee, that's taboo. So the window for what a taboo romance is so wide, so incredibly wide, that just marking something as taboo is not going to be considered enough to inform a reader, a potential reader, of what taboo means. Here's another one over here by Literary Inspired, and we're just getting different readers' interpretations on this because I don't think there's really a study on this, which is why I'm presenting you with some discussion stuff and then asking you guys to contribute to what this is. So dark romance has become an increasingly popular subgenre of romance literature. These books explore relationships that are often fraught with tension, angst, and conflict. They push boundaries and can be uncomfortable to read at times, but they have captured the attention of readers around the world. But what is it about dark romances that draws readers in? Why do we find problematic relationships in literature so alluring? In this post, we explore the appeal of dark romances and why it has become such a popular subgenre. First, it's important to note that not all dark romance novels are the same. There are different levels of darkness, and some books can be extreme while others not. Some examples of dark romance novels include 50 Shades of Grey, the Kiss the Thief, and Crossfire series by Sylvia Day. One of the main draws of dark romance is tension between the two main characters. In many cases, they also have a love-hate relationship with both characters struggling to come to terms with their feelings for each other. The conflict between them can be intense and emotionally charged, making for a gripping read. I would like to mention, for anybody unfamiliar with Haunting Adeline, that it is about human trafficking and a stalker, and the man puts a gun up the vagina of the one girl that he is courting, who they are the endgame main couple, by the way, and rapes her with a gun. And in I think the second book, she has a knife that cuts her vagina open. I think that dark romance is closer to horror because all you have to actually do, I think dark romance is closer to horror than it is romance because all you have to do is change the background music from like Walking on Sunshine to one of those high-pitched violin, you're getting stalked music, and suddenly it's horror. Like, that's the only difference. Or you just make the guy ugly. Get rid of those six-pack washboard abs, and then his millionaire status. I have a hard time believing that we're going to think this is cute anymore. Another reason why dark romance is so appealing is that it can be a form of escapism. Readers can immerse themselves in a world that is different from their own and experience the thrill of dangerous, passionate romance without any of the real-life consequences. Can somebody please inform me how a gun up the vagina is considered passionate romance? Again, I feel like we're downplaying what dark romance actually is, and I don't know why that is. However, it's important to note that not everyone is a fan of dark romance. Some readers find it uncomfortable and even problematic, especially in their relationships depicted in the books are unhealthy or abusive. It's crucial to approach these books with a critical eye and to be aware of the potential issues that may arise. I'm also thinking of the book, I think it's by the same person that did Haunting Adeline, but I can't remember, where it's called Does It Hurt? And yes, that is a reference to the guy's dick. And yes, that story does rape a woman until she has become his lover. And he also, I'm pretty sure that's the story where he shoves her, he like punches her in the face and then shoves her underwater with sharks circling as he rapes her. Can somebody please tell me how this is a form of escapism where you like want to explore this sort of passionate romance? Like, what is it? That's one of the things why I wanted to discuss this, because I'm just like, you're saying you want to explore this. No judgment. What do you get out of this? Like, what is the draw? Do you like to see women punished? Do you like to see women tortured? And I'm wondering if there's a part of this where it's psychologically one of two ways, mostly. Like, I'm sure there's a lot because it's a nuanced thing and people are nuanced and varied. But number one, is their enjoyment out of this specifically because there's an enjoyment in watching a woman have her free will taken away, basically, having her reduced to nothing but a thoughtless person who is at the behest, at the will of the man, who is now brainwashing her, basically, by having sex with her into compliance. Or is there some kind of enjoyment that's taken out of this because it's watching another woman be punished? Because by watching somebody else suffer, you feel better about yourself. Because that's also a psychological phenomenon. If you read The Bluest Eye, that entire book is about the phenomena of the neighborhood watching Piccola's terrible family and Piccola have a terrible, just traumatic childhood, being raped by her father and getting pregnant by her father, and then the dad being kicked out. And the entire neighborhood looks at Piccola and feels better about themselves because they're like, thank God that I'm not that girl, that my daughter is not that girl. So is there some level of catharsis or of comfort that comes with watching another woman be subjugated and abused and brainwashed and turned into this thing that has no agency? Or is the enjoyment from humiliation and subjugation that removes the agency, that objectifies the person? Because that is also a phenomenon. We're going to talk about the effects of objectification later in the future. And I want to know if that is something that draws certain people to it specifically for the enjoyment of it. For a little bit further to get into different people's opinions on this, here is a question from Reddit saying, why do you like dark romance? Because, we're just sourcing information here. Setting is usually interesting. You can find interesting settings in a variety of books. I'm just saying the main characters have legitimate and reasonable conflict instead of ones being based on miscommunication. Like, you looked at me funny and then stood next to your ex-boyfriend, so naturally I took a job in Iowa without telling you. You can get that in other places. Dark romance is quite psychological. You tend to get inside the heads of the main characters as they deal with extreme situations, and I like that. You can get that in other situations. Hello, American Psycho. A lot of dark romance isn't particularly realistic, so that helps you write about how to deal with X, Y, and Z. I'm pretty nutty. But I wouldn't expect that if I got kidnapped by a mob boss, he would subject me to gourmet meals and a 5-star spa hotel experience. But this is what happens in a lot of dark romance books. The drama of these books keeps me engaged. Because of the nature of the relationships being portrayed, they tend to kick into gear when the female main character finds out what is going on. There is intimacy here. I see romance as no different than horror or any other genre. I have no deep need to keep my romances only light and sweet. But what draws you specifically to dark romance? I also like the idea of a woman taming a man, and so the more they need to tame, the better. I personally love stalking stories. Clearly, I would never allow that IRL. But in fiction, I just like the idea of a man being that fixated on a woman. It's interesting to me. Bro, as somebody with a stalker and who's had a stalker for a couple of months now, and nothing that you say changes the way that they think because they're just going to take everything the way that they want to take it and disregard you and lie to your face, it's not fun. It's not fun. I guess me tends to like something unreal. So unreal that we think that it would never happen in real life. And I feel like a lot of women who like the genre are mostly have a strong role, or just somehow people like that look at them as independent and I can survive without a man type of woman, also known as an alpha woman. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe they're, tired and playing that role in society. Maybe it is just another way to release the stress by imagining a character that 180 different percent from them in terms of being a sub, weak and all of that. So being forced into objectification, having that free will taken away from them, having that agency taken away from them because they feel overwhelmed in real life. For me, it's the fact that even in the most dire and aromantic situations, love can be found. They can love and will prevail even amongst people who don't typically deserve it. I don't know, the obsession with falling in love with your rapist is very bizarre to me, and I've read it in more than a couple of stories. His name was Augustin had it, Flames of Lethe had it, and I only read Flames of Lethe to try to understand the author of His Name was Augustin better, and it was literally just getting into a threesome with the guy that anally raped her and that she went to hell with because she killed herself after killing him, and then they got together in the end in a threesome relationship with a guy named Adam as well. And I don't understand. Game of Thrones is hugely popular. No one ever asks men, are you okay with reading about war and rape and torture and assorted violence? Honestly, that's not true. But I, in general, like to understand what draws people to things because I just think it's interesting. The level of defensiveness when it comes to just why do you like this is bizarre to me, especially when we went to these two articles that was talking about the popularity of dark romance. Why is there so much lying regarding it? Is that out of shame? Simple. It's a fantasy. In real life, I like nice, caring guys, but in fiction, I like to explore villains and assholes. Since it's not real, I can separate myself and explore these types safely. So is it part of exploring sexuality in a way where they would have felt bad about it IRL, but then in books, they don't have to feel necessarily the shame that possibly comes with it because of abstinence, of this feeling of abstinence culture or hangover of abstinence culture from when they were kids. And that's what I want to get into now from the New York Times, how an abstinence pledge in the 90s shamed a generation of evangelicals. To the uninitiated, Christianity's evangelical movement can seem like a monolith that brooks no dissent on certain core issues. Same-sex relationships are sinful, men's spiritual dominance over women is divinely ordained, and in the political front, Donald J. Trump was an improbable but nonetheless valued protector of the faith. But not everything is what it appears to be. The movement is in fact rife with division, a reality reinforced last month when Beth Moore, an evangelical writer and teacher with a huge following, formally ended her long affiliation with the Southern Baptist Convention, principally because of its tight embrace of the licentious truth-challenged Mr. Trump. It was a rupture several years in the making, as Miss Moore told Religious News Service. Disenchantment took hold when Mr. Trump became the poster child for the great white hope of evangelicalism, the salvation of the church in America. But the former president's behavior is not the only issue buffeting the evangelical movement. White supremacy, male subjugation of women, the spat of sexual abuse cases, scandals involving prominent figures like Jerry Falwell Jr. all have combined to undermine the authority of religious leaders, prompt members like Miss Moore to abandon the Southern Baptist Convention. Retro Report, which examines through video how the past shapes the present, turns attention to an artifact of religious conservatism from the movement. This is the so-called purity pledge, taken in the main by teenagers who pledged to abstain from sex until they were married. Some swore not to do so much as kiss another person or even go on a date for fear of putting themselves on the road to moral failure. Devotion to this concept took hold in the early 90s when fear of AIDS and other sexually transmitted diseases bolstered up the evangelical movement's gospel of teen abstinence. It was a view put forth as God commanded and had the support of like-minded political leaders from the White House of Ronald Reagan and that of Mr. Trump. Many people certainly found lifelong contentment because of having to wait for the right mate, but for others, as the Retro Reports video shows, the dictates of the purity movement were so emotionally onerous that their adulthoods have been filled with apprehension and in some cases physical pain. There are people like Lindy K. Klein who embraced the movement in her teens but left in a disenchantment at 21 2 decades ago. She described the trauma and the shame that she felt in a way. Quote, "I would find myself in tears and in a ball in the corner of my bed, crying, my eczema coming out, which it does when I'm stressed, and scratching myself till I bleed and having deep shame reaction." Miss Klein found that she was far from alone. She collected tales of enduring anxiety in a book, Pure, Inside the Evangelical Movement That Shamed the Generation of Young Women, and How I Broke Free. We went to war with our own bodies and our own sexual natures, all under the strict commandment of the church. It was under the aegis of the Southern Baptist Convention that the vows of virginity took distinct form in True Love Waits, a program begun in 1993. As the movement grew in the 90s, estimates of teenagers' adherents reached a high of 2.5 million worldwide. Youngsters wore purity rings, signed purity pledge cards, and attended purity balls with girls dressed in white and escorted by their fathers. Now, I never went through any of this. So earlier I told you, like, I believe in waiting until marriage. I am waiting until marriage. It's not really something that is on my need-to-do list, and I don't feel a desire to have to go and do anything. I don't feel any pressure to go and do anything. But I've always felt like I've seen this pressure and this competition between stuff like this, where it goes over the top, where it is like worshiping purity, which includes in the fiction that like worships the virgin and then shames everybody. Or it goes in the opposite direction, where people felt like they were pushed to such an extreme corner where they felt so bad about themselves, and then now as adults they're sort of fighting back. I kind of mentioned this on Thursday with the video Let's Talk About It, and how that relates to not only Let's Talk About It, but Genderqueer and Flamer and other comics that are coming out from millennials, older millennials especially, that feel like it's a response to this feeling of feeling ashamed, a feeling unprepared, a feeling like they didn't get what they needed as teenagers. And I'm wondering, because I was homeschooled, number one. I mean, let's just pile on the stereotypes, right? I was homeschooled, so I never felt this pressure with my peers. I'm also mildly emotionally stupid and socially stupid, so peer pressure doesn't really work on me. I never really got along very well in my churches that I went to, and I didn't just blindly accept what people told me to do. If they wanted me to obey, they had to give me a good reason to obey. And because I'm the boss, is not a good enough reason. I fought with a lot of people and got kicked out of church, got kicked out of youth church more than a couple of times, to the point that I was like, okay, I don't need to go to youth church anymore. They're not serving me. They don't care about me. They prove they don't care about me. And so I found my own way. But so I'm wondering, like, how much, especially because there's so much religious language in some of the dark romance books, that is it a part of exploring the stuff where they felt unprepared, or it's a response, a psychological response, not even one that's done, knowingly, but it is this response of feeling this pressure put on them that was not being seen as a person. Because if you're reduced to your virginity as your value, which still happens today, you see it happen politically. Like your body count, if you were a virgin, people telling you that you will never be loved or you're used up if you've ever had any kind of partnership at all. Like there is such a lack of nuance in general, whether it comes to having multiple partners, being promiscuous, settling down, or having no partners, because people do shame you for having no partners or waiting until marriage. Because there's enough people that if you say, hey, I'm waiting, they think that you're some kind of religious freak. So you can't really please anybody. And how much of that is affecting the psychology of women and women's sexuality, where you can't talk about it with anybody because everybody is a landmine waiting to go off. The fundamental message, inspired by a verse from Paul the Apostle's first epistle to the Thessalonians, was this, quote, I am making a commitment to myself, my family, and my creator that I will abstain from sexual activity of any kind before marriage. I will keep my body and my thoughts pure as I trust my God's perfect plan for my life. Separate from religious imperatives, American teenagers in general have become warier of premarital relations and certainly of unprotected sex. According to the federal government, there were 61.8 births in 1991 for every 1,000 young women in 15 to 19 age group. By 2018, the figure had dwindled to 17.4, a decline that cut across racial and ethnic lines. Isn't that interesting? Among those who regarded purity in terms of spiritual enlightenment, few in the 90s came to be more celebrated than Joshua Harris, a young man who preached that even sex-free dating was a slippery slope of compromised life. People take stuff so far to such an extreme, and you see it in the reaction to things. Like, people push down and then try to contain you and try to force your behavior in one way, and you kind of just swing the other way in like every single time. And maybe that's why I am pretty milquetoast in general, because it's like I didn't really feel a lot of pressure, but I'm also kind of not very emotional in general. I have a distance from emotions, but the problem is, like, I don't feel regular emotions, and when I do feel emotions, it's always an extreme of some kind, and it's depression. Like, that's pretty much it. That's all that exists, is sadness, and it's if it hits a certain bar. Otherwise, I don't really respond to things. I do get stress fevers though. His 1997 book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, sold elements like emotional attachment, intellectual compatibility, and simple virtues of kindness and understanding. I don't necessarily see those as a problem. There is also what the writer Caitlin Beatty had called sexual prosperity gospel, the promise hardly always realized that during sex as a teenager will be rewarded later with a lifelong marriage of physical joy along with spiritual fulfillment. See, there's also that where like there's this overpromise. There's the overpromise that if you sexually are compatible, then it's going to work out absolutely. And then you have the other side that says if you wait until marriage, you're also definitely going to not have any problems. The issue here is that marriage is a partnership. It's work. And so just because you do something does not mean that it is actually going to create a true marriage that has no problems, because that is impossible. Am I crazy for having all of this nuance for this? Is that the problem that we're actually experiencing? There is not a single way to be in a good and loyal relationship. There's not a single way to be in a healthy relationship. There is not a single way that a pair of partners can act to be in that kind of relationship. And so like pushing either or really just feels like it creates a competitiveness that doesn't need to be there. and then a guilt either way, where it's girls that don't have sex are guilted and called freaks, and then girls who do have sex are called promiscuous whores and are also called freaks, and then everybody hates each other. Then two, some grew unhappy with the singular burden that seemed to be placed on young women, reigning in lust. The guys' lust as well as their own tended to fall on them. It's women and girls' responsibility to dress right, to act right, to talk right, to do everything just right to ensure non-sexuality for all people, Miss Klein said in a 2018 interview with National Public Radio. So when it comes to this, and it's so weird, so because this kind of goes in with, there is some level of tie-in also with the current obsession with erasing female agency and free will and the infantilization of women. But you've also, not only do you have, like, we're seeing this same thing play out in video games, right? Because I've talked about it before with video games and art and like pretty characters and what people are calling the uglification characters, where it is again focusing on making women look a certain way or be a certain way in order to give them value. And if you are not this certain way, then you don't have value and you're insulted. And previously it was keep these characters looking like they previously did, don't change their design. But then we've switched to even insulting original characters who don't fit a certain thing. And so again, it is this battle of you have to be either super, super innocent, virgin purity, or this sex bomb. And there is no chill between. It takes away the agency, which is something that is actually very, very interesting to me that I found. Another thing is 10 signs of a woman with emotional damage from Power of Purity. I brought this up because I wanted to compare it or think about it with how the female protagonists in dark romance are generally portrayed. And so anybody familiar with dark romance, let me know your thoughts on this in general, because we're going to look at these 10 things. Overwhelmed by intense emotions. In the tapestry of human emotions, there are moments when feelings surge with such intensity that we sweep individuals into a maelstrom of experience. The phenomena is distinct in women's lives as they often navigate the depths of intense emotional reactions that can be all-consuming. The canvas of intense emotional responses in women is painted with vivid strokes that encompass the spectrum of feelings: joy, grief, anger, and love, each with a vibrant hue. You know what's interesting? Overwhelmed by intense love, and we got this, overwhelmed by intense feeling, and we got this thing of women that have emotional damage. And just this morning, there was a brief conversation. By brief conversation, I just mean it was brought up. How, not that long ago, just a couple of decades ago, really, institutionalized rape was a cure for women's emotional instability, or what people claimed was emotional instability. If you look into the background of the vibrator, why was it created? It was actually created as a medical device to be used on women who were institutionalized for insanity, because they believed that if you forced a woman to orgasm, she would chill out. And so then women were institutionalized, and we know that historically, women were not only institutionalized for actually being a problem, they were institutionalized to get rid of them. They were institutionalized for talking back. And so then these doctors were then trusted to treat these women. And what were they treated with? Rape. And so it's interesting that we can recognize the high emotions of women, the value that women have by being emotional. And yet there's also generally this desire to punish women for being emotional. It's either a complete dismissal that if you are emotional, you are absolutely worthless. And there are certainly large groups of people that see any sort of emotional response as something that devalues you, that is not worth listening to you. And they already view women as subhuman or subpar. And then it's just finding more reasons in order to call somebody that. I've noticed in a lot of opiner space, the go-to, and by opiner space, I mean political circles, the go-to insult is to call somebody else a female. Stop acting feminine. Stop being feminine. And what is that saying? It's saying that being a female is lesser than being whatever that's expected of them, which is to be a man. And what happens when you are being a female? You get dismissed because you're considered childish. You're considered thoughtless, too emotional. You can't be trusted. You have no agency or free will. So you're lesser. And it's interesting that we can recognize that there is a power in emotion, because emotions, people don't remember what you've said. They remember how you made them feel. People don't remember all of the logic in a book. They generally, if they're going to grade a book based on how it made them feel, they're going to like it if it made them feel good, if it fulfilled something in them. And by feel good, it can still mean the catharsis of pain. But emotion is constantly used as a way to denigrate or dismiss people. And yet emotion is such a powerful thing, and it's something that connects us to one another. It's what makes us human. It's one of the things that makes us human, and it's one of the things that allows us to connect to one another. So the level of punishment that women get, and any extreme of any kind, typically results in a negative effect. Too much emotion, dangerous. Too little emotion, also dangerous, because we see it in the dehumanization of others by having zero emotional response and zero emotional care. But the level of punishment that comes from having emotion and being used against women is been something interesting for me to be looking at. And then what is the response to women who are being emotional? Oh, do things to make them more emotional instead of figuring out a way to sort of manage those emotions, and then listen to what those emotions are telling somebody. And then does this play into overwhelmed by intense emotions? Does then this come into play with how dark romance often focuses on creating intense, high emotional stakes, high emotional moments? That's the question. Number 2, emotional damage can cause one to struggle with body image. The intersections of emotional damage and self-perception often create a poignant struggle for women where feelings within shape their reflections in the mirrors. This internal battle frequently translates into body image issues, a challenge that transcends aesthetics. Societal pressures, fueled by media portrayals and cultural standards, further shape this struggle. These pressures place magnifying glasses on physical appearances, often overshadowing the richness of individual qualities. The result is a tug of war between personal feelings and external influences, leaving women to grapple with the conflict between how they feel inside and how they are expected to look outside. And this can be between being athletic, between sex bomb women, or women with large breasts being treated a certain way, or women with smaller breasts being treated a certain way. It's like everywhere you look, somebody's got something to say about how you look wrong as a female because you're either too sexy or you're not sexy enough. And it, I think, affects how women not only view themselves, but view each other. And then how does this usually come into not just dark romances, but romances in general? Often the antagonistic female or the other female is going to be opposite of what the main is. If the main character is a brunette, then you're often going to have the alternative female be blonde. If the main character is small breasted, then you're often going to have the opposing female be large breasted. And so does that tie into the idea of emotional damage causes one to struggle with body image, and so then that antagonistic female in the story becomes the embodiment of those body images? Am I thinking too deep on this? I don't know. I just think it's fascinating. Fear of vulnerability, which also, does it allow you to escape vulnerability by doing these high, oh my gosh, would that be part of it? You get these high intensity, not realistic situations, like being stalked by this guy that has kind of supernatural things about him, having a gun shoved up your vagina, getting into these major, unrealistic, unlikely scenarios. It stops you from actually having to be vulnerable in a real way, to feel real emotions, or to focus on something that can really, really happen, because these are so out of nowhere, so extreme that they are very unlikely to happen in the cases of most people. Not that, grooming of a child by a step-parent can't happen, because it does, but it's just out of the realm so much that it allows readers to face something extreme and emotional without having to be vulnerable. Tendency to isolate. Within the intricate landscapes of emotions, a typical response to emotional damage is the tendency to withdraw and isolate. For many women, the instinct to seek solitude in times of turmoil can be pronounced, leading to what we refer to as emotional isolation. Exploring these intricate behaviors, we uncover the reasons behind her retreat from social situations and shed light on how isolation can serve as a coping mechanism in the face of emotional challenges. The inclination to retreat into solitude often arises as a protective mechanism. In times, the emotional turmoil, the noise, and demands of social interactions can feel overwhelming. The crucial distinction lies in recognizing when isolation is necessary self-care practicing and when it transforms into a hindrance of well-being. How often in these books do things happen where the characters are alienated or isolated? They get taken away from their friends, they have no families, any of those things, and it only focuses on putting them in this vulnerable situation where they are going to be abused and allows them to be isolated. What does that speak? When they are so alone, they have no friendships or very minimal friendships, or are taken away from those friendships to put in those situations. constant need for validation. Seeking validation often stems from a fundamental desire to have one's feelings, opinions, and experiences acknowledged and affirmed by others. External validation can serve as a powerful boost of esteem, fostering a sense of acceptance and validation. Yet when this yearning becomes incessant, it can evolve into a reliance of external opinions that risk overshadowing one's intrinsic self-worth. How many of these books specifically focus on not only abusing the women, but it's part of it is the I am so obsessed with you that I will break the laws to be with you. And it's, baby girl, you are so fucking hot. And it's all of these guys gang banging the heck out of that woman because they are telling her how special she is. She is the only one that any of them want. And it focuses so much on those compliments, right? Exhibits people-pleasing behaviors. A distinct sign that often emerges in human interactions is the tendency to exhibit people-pleasing tendencies. This inclination, particularly pronounced among women, involves going above and beyond to satisfy others' needs. This exploration aims to unravel the motivations driving the behavior, shedding light on its links to a fear of disappointment and longing for acceptance. People-pleasing often stems from a genuine desire to nurture positive relationships and create harmony. However, it can evolve into excessive self-sacrifice, which how often does that happen in the dark romances where it is excessive self-sacrifice in order to tame the beast of the other men? As a result of this habit, women suffer emotional damage. It turns into the abuse. This pattern may be deeply connected to a fear of disappointing others or a belief that one's value is tied to one's ability to contribute. Difficulties forming healthy relationships. Like, we don't even have the entire dark romance genre is defined by unhealthy relationships and abuse, really. 8. Emotional damage can lead to fear of physical intimacy. And so then how much of these stories revolve around force and rape and making the women get into those positions that they don't want to be in? Also, an interesting thing is how these stories written by women are created to force women into these roles or into these relationships. Overly self-critical, a notable sign often observed in the inclination towards being self-critical prevalent among women with emotional damage. This tendency highlights the internal dialogue that shapes self-perception. Our exploration delves into the self-talk, unveiling the self-blame and guilt. This internal narrative molds self-perception and actions. For some women, it becomes a critical voice scrutinizing every decision. How often is this considered in female narratives when the female is so overly judgmental of themselves? And I think we can even go all the way back to everybody's favorite dead horse to keep kicking, Twilight, where the character is like, I'm so plain, I'm so ordinary, nobody is going to love me. Like, Joey obviously goes through this. She's got emotional issues like nobody's business. But how often in these dark romances are the female characters critical of themselves, think lowly of themselves, and then the guy that comes in is like, oh no, babe, you're the hottest fucking bitch around here. Be my girl. Like, you got the overcritical of the self and then the validation of the external factor. How often is that common in these kinds of stories? Inconsistent emotional boundaries. Oh my gosh. Feyre! A notable sorry. A notable sign is the struggle women face with emotional boundaries. This challenge highlights the difficulty in defining, maintaining these limits. Our exploration uncovers how past boundary violations contribute to this struggle with emotional boundaries. Emotional boundary setting can be complex. Past violations can create uncertainty between personal and shared emotions, resulting in inconsistency. These fluctuations may stem from a fear of rejection, conflict avoidance, and prioritizing others' needs. So how often in this case do you have she is allowing somebody else to violate her boundaries, and then it's a problem when others do the same, like her people pleasing to allow certain people that she wants to please to violate her in order to not be removed, if that makes sense. I feel like a lot of this may come into the psychology behind why some of these books are written, but I don't want to like make any generalizations to say this is absolutely, we are psychoanalyzing every single book ever written. But I do think that it is an interesting thing to sort of analyze going forward with discussion on these kinds of books and how characters are portrayed, because you're going to run into characters all over the place who are emotionally damaged. But it's interesting to think of how much of this genre is powered by emotionally damaged characters, and we're seeing that. Like, You can't have dark romance without emotionally damaged characters. Like, that's just how it is. But is that one of the draws to reading the genre? Is to see that damage played out and explore it in a safer environment. Finally, I want to talk about the objectification of women, because I actually found this very, very interesting as I was looking it up this morning. Media-induced sexual harassment, the routes from sexually objectifying media to sexual harassment. In the abstract of this, and I will link these studies down in the description below for you to get a better look at them, because I have 4 that I want to bring up briefly, or 3 I want to bring up briefly. A fourth I have 3 that I want to bring up briefly, and then I want to talk secondarily about some characters of mine that kind of play into these ideas. So the abstract of this first one is that media that sexually objectifies women by portraying them in ways that emphasizes physical beauty and sexual readiness, as well as reduces them to decorative and sexual objects, have been traditionally identified by scholars as a powerful cultural risk, factoring encouraging sexual harassment and sexual violence. I feel like this goes back to the guy that says women just like being raped and want to just become rags. And I mentioned that that was a dangerous thought in my response to that comment. In the present article, we review the existing empirical evidence linking sexually objectifying media and sexual harassment of women to the overarching and integrative media-induced sexual harassment framework. This framework offers a coherent scheme for explaining the effects of sexual objectifying media on 3 target groups directly involved in sexual harassment, or perpetrators, victims, and bystanders. And it postulates 3 cognitive and emotional mechanisms through which sexually objectifying media leads to sexual harassment: dehumanization, disruption of emphatic resonance, and a shift in gender norms. The evidence reviewed on the basis of media-induced sexual harassment framework shows that sexually objectifying media coverage is normal in normalizing harassment behaviors and can be a casual risk factor for increasing engagement in sexual harassment, heightening victims' acceptance of sexual harassment, and discouraging bystander intervention because it's just considered normal. We discuss the implications of these arguments for effectively preventing negative effects for exposure to sexually objectifying media and for education programs aimed at critical media consumption. So this isn't an argument against creating sexual characters or sexually provocative or beautiful characters at all. I don't want it to seem like I'm saying that, because I think that every character has a place. Every style of character, every style of woman has a place. I think what ends up getting lost in the conversations about female characters and female portrayals is just this nuance of how different stories are told. And every female character has a purpose. And sometimes the purpose in that story is to just be beautiful. Sometimes it's deeper. But then you come into this thing where it's asking for every single character to be a certain way. Make every single character ugly. Make every single character beautiful. Hit this certain standard. Story be damned. Because the women are just objects one way or another. That's what it kind of feels like to me, is why is Aloy picked on from Horizon? She's an original character. She looks great. What's the matter here? And she's not sexified. That's it. She has free agency, which actually does come into this. I want to go over to how our brains turn women into objects. Again, this is not anything against objectification. It's something that people do and do for themselves. And I think that it is a very interesting aspect of writing, of creating, of understanding human nature and society and how we interact with one another, that it can actually really help you write better characters as well, to understand these little things that are going on around us without us even knowing. Again, it's why having these sorts of conversations is difficult, because I don't want to demonize or seem like I'm demonizing anybody. I want to talk about these subjects, bring these subjects up, get different ideas about these things, about different types of characters. And it's nobody is at fault. Nobody is disgusting. Nobody is in the wrong. It's just, have you seen this and what do you think of this? Recent reports, this is from Scientific American. Recent reports of a mountain lion or a cougar stalking the campus of University of Iowa prompted campus jokesters to tweet their surprise that Michelle Bachmann was in town. A cougar, colloquially, is an attractive older woman who seeks out trysts with younger men, and to some, it seems that Bachmann fits the bill. The emphasis on appearance is nothing new for high-profile women who are anything but homely, and feminist scholars are quick to point out its potential detrimental effect on perceptions of female competence. Of course, we don't need to consider reactions to political candidates to understand this idea. There is a well-known tension between seeing someone as and appreciating them for their body as opposed to a mind. At least, that's what parents tell their daughters when their school clothes veer too far into the revealing. Science has backed parents up on this. A recent study found that showing men pictures of sexualized women evokes less activity in the areas of the brain responsible for mental state attributions. That is, the area of the brain that becomes active when we think when we are looking at an entity capable of thought and planned action. Other studies have found similar results, which means that in some cases in the studies, when shown sexualized women, the parts of the brain that recognize women as being people stop turning on. And so then it looks like they're just the same as objects. They're incapable of thought. And I've seen too many people. We go back to the guy who said women just want to become rags. When you look at, oh my gosh, it's porn brain. It's legitimately porn brain. This is the scientific study of porn brain. Oh no. When men see body shots of women as compared to face shots, they judge women to be less intelligent, likable, ambitious, and competent. A new study by Kurt Gray and colleagues in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, however, suggests that this kind of objectification might not cause perceivers to see women as mindless bodies, but instead cause a transformation in the kind of minds that they perceive. Research into mind perception has found two dimensions along which we tend to categorize others: agency, the capacity to act or plan, and experience, the capacity to feel emotions. A robot, for example, is high on the dimensions of agency and low on experience. It can think, but it can't feel. When we see flesh, on the other hand, we tend to see experience, but not agency, an entity capable of pleasure and pain, but not necessarily the sharpest or the most useful tool in the shed. So, objectification might not lead to the perceptions of women as an inanimate object, but as a different kind of human, ones that are capable of feelings, but not thinking. To test this hypothesis, Gray and others presented participants with images of individuals and varied the amount of flesh shown in pictures. In line with their hypothesis, seeing full bodies as compared to just faces caused ratings of agency to diminish, but ratings of experience to increase. The same was true when naked bodies were compared to clothed bodies. Indeed, as the sexual suggestiveness of the images increased, perceptions of agency decreased and perceptions of experience increased accordingly. While this might initially seem modestly encouraging in that the objectified are perceived as humans but not as objects, there is a disconcerting side effect of perceiving entities as high on experience. We see them as more capable of being harmed and therefore as more in need of protection. The researchers demonstrated this in a final study that showed participants are less willing to inflict painful shocks on half-naked individuals as compared to clothed individuals. It seems that when we see bodies, we tend to see the potential victims, and though victimhood might be endearing for some, it certainly won't help win elections. Not that that matters. But, so there's part of the brain that does see women as being less able to think the more naked they are, that they're less able to have autonomy the more sexual they are. And it just happens. It's nobody's fault. But this plays into the way that people are perceived. And so then I'm thinking of stuff like how interesting it is in some cases, not all cases, okay? I'm looking at people saying they want more characters, women characters, to be scantily clad and sexy in certain things. And if that takes away the agency, the idea that somebody can act, the more sexual they are. One, it shows some level of why women that are dressed like that or that look that certain way are disrespected to the way that they are or are considered stupid because they're considered mentally unable to think. And then that becomes frustrating to those women who are just blessed with looking beautiful, who are proud of their bodies, who are smart women, who are incredible women, but they're considered stupid because of that brain chemistry. Final study that I want to bring up is from the National Library of Medicine that says, do self-objectified women believe themselves to be free? Sexual objectification and belief in personal free will. And this is also very interesting. This will be the last section today. And I'm just going to cover the abstract to give you an idea since this is a very long study. So we're just going to kind of cover some cliff notes of it. The present study aims to investigate the indirect link between sexual objectification and belief in personal free will. We hypothesized that being subjected to objectifying commentary would lead women to self-objectify and in turn perceive themselves as having less personal free will. In this study, 105 women were asked to sign up for a website created for the study by providing a personal description and a photo. After signing up, they received feedback from a fictitious male user. Depending on the condition, the comment was neutral, focused on their description, non-objectifying, or focused on their physical appearance, objectifying. The results showed that participants in the objectifying condition self-objectified and in turn believed that they had less personal free will. The theoretical and practical implications of these findings for educators and therapists are discussed. So the more a woman is self-objectified, or the more a woman is objectified, then she ends up believing that she starts self-objectifying based on this study. And then she starts to believe that she has less free will. She has less agency. She has less ability. Such a belief has unexplored outcome of sexual objectification in the sexual domain so far. However, we believe that belief in personal free will is a relevant dimension to better comprehend many gender interactions. These relationships are often characterized by asymmetrical power in which women are subordinate and not prone in engaging activities to change the status quo. We believe that our study represents an attempt to elucidate a possible mechanism which sexual objectification might contribute to undermine women's intentions to engage in active actions. Indeed, it could be that women, when experiencing self-objectification, are less inclined to rebel against dangerous relationships because of a decreased belief in personal free will. Accordingly, such experiences could affect women's tendency to say no in particularly ambiguous situations and to engage in active actions of rebellion. From this perspective, our findings also support the idea that sexual objectification consists of the transformation of women in entities lacking the human rights of well-being and freedom. These reflections are in the line with recent studies that explore the impact of appearance complements on people's performance. As Kohalan and colleagues argued, such compliments, as they are commonly and specifically addressed to women, represent a subtle mechanism that perpetuates gender inequality by undermining not only women's performance, but also their belief to have the ability to make free choices. Now, again, this isn't something to go after anybody to say you are wrong for complimenting women or anything. This is to understand the psychology behind this and how people are affected and to kind of start a conversation about this, because I think it is insanely interesting. And then looking at this, then you look at dark romance, which a lot of the stories of dark romance actually take away the woman's ability to, the woman's agency, is she is subject to other people's control. And in some cases, you have stuff where they are trafficked and it is a heavily pornographic situation with the trafficking or the abduction, but it becomes becoming the leader or kind of claiming a sexuality, claiming the leadership, the power position, or as some said, the taming of the monster, where they are that object, they start as that object and they gain agency through gaining control of that thing. Or you're in the situation where the girls have always lost agency, have never had agency, because it starts out with grooming and it remains with grooming. And so looking at it from that perspective, is this kind of might go back more even to the idea of the abstinence pledges and how much of it was trying to take back some form of control, of feeling like being reduced to an object, which is a long-running issue. About the emerged patterns of findings, it is noteworthy that, although our main hypothesis was confirmed, our results show that the objectifying male gaze does not directly affect participants' belief in their free will. So it is not what other people say that affects the idea of free will. It is the woman treated in an objectifying way reported similar levels of belief in free will to those who received the neutral feedback. This lack of difference may suggest that some form of objectification, in this case a comment on a woman's physical appearance, are so common and widespread that they do not affect their belief regarding free will. On the other hand, our findings revealed that when women participants received a comment positively emphasizing personal competence, it increased their belief in personal free will. At least it compared to neutral at least if compared to neutral feedback. This unexpected finding may suggest interesting new paths. Indeed, it is plausible to hypothesize that for women, the attribution of personal competence can have an opposite effect to that of the objectifying comments by increasing their self-perception of being powerful agents feeling and their empowerment. So basically, being recognized for your skills as opposed to only being recognized for your body is going to make women feel like they have a choice, like they have an option, like they have agency. Regarding the causal path between self-objectification and belief in personal free will, the conditional process model confirmed the hypothesis that self-objectification, conveying those objectifying feedback, affects the particular belief. However, it is noteworthy that when considering the objectifying versus non-objectifying feedback in the alternative models, belief in personal free will mediated the relationship between receiving objectifying feedback and increased self-objectification. Therefore, it is plausible to hypothesize the bidirectional relationship between self-objectification and belief in personal free will, in which the perceptions of having less free will could in turn strengthen the women's self-perception of being similar to an object and thus contribute to create a vicious and detrimental cycle. Ultimate conclusion, and obviously and generally with these types of scientific studies, I read a bunch of them in graduate school, they're like, further information, further studies are necessary because they constantly want to raise the amount of the study sample that they have. So always learning more, always trying to see more. But in conclusion, findings of our work suggest that women who are objectified daily and consequently are pushed to objectify themselves could feel incapable of making conscious choices and thus be less able to rebel when placed in these situations. Given the importance and sensitivity of these issues for today's society, we hope that our study can encourage further research to more deeply investigate the critical relationship between sexual self-objectification and women's belief in free will. So that kind of makes me wonder if in some cases objectification or comments are used to try to sap women of their agency or of their pushback when it comes to these power pushes. Because in the public sphere, there is a lot of power play going on, like a lot. On the topic of objectification and of feeling like you lack free will, I did want to bring up two of my female characters that I have because I love them. They they kind of embody this in different ways, and I can't wait to share them within their own worlds. One of them is Michi, and she is a cabaret girl in Japan. And one thing that happened to her when she was younger, when she was in school still, is she randomly just started developing like a lot in high school. And she was kind of just a regular girl and had a bunch of friends until she started developing. And then her relationship with her peers changed. The girls got jealous of her. The boys were looking at her in a different way because she was sexually developed, that she just stopped being Michi and she started being this woman. And that separated her from these people. There were people stealing her panties when she was in gym class to like sell them to the other kids. She was approached to do AV work when she was still in high school. She got groped a lot. And eventually as she became an adult, she chose to go work in a cabaret as a sort of way of making the decision that I am being treated this way. And so I'm going to choose to make this my job because I am now choosing to be in this position. So it helped her reinforce this idea that she is in control and she has control and she is putting herself in this situation to be safely objectified, to give her this feeling that everything is not out of her control. Then you have Marcella Bailey, who is in the Westies, and her father sees her as an item to be traded. She's an object to be traded. She was an investment that he had when she was a baby, and the plan was to trade her to a family, to merge his family with their family and to create their gun empire and make it bigger. Because he later trades Marcella to Christopher Maxim and Maxim's family, who does metal work, who does metal mining, and they're going to become Maxim and Bailey, which is going to be a bigger gun manufacturer where everything is in-house and it all works. But Marcella is in love with somebody else, and she's been in love with somebody else, and she works with her dad and tries to tell her dad, I don't want to marry Christopher, I'm in love with this other person. And constantly she is just pushed off with, you can't make those decisions, you're just a girl, you're daydreaming. And that's fine, but girls are emotional and they can't make such serious decisions. So she is actively told that she has no agency, that she belongs to the men in her life, and it is them who are going to decide what happens to her, and she has no choice. And every time she tries, she gets pushback and she is told that she has no agency. She is treated as though she has no agency. And so these are things that actually come up in these stories with these women in very different places in different ways of how they see themselves, how the world sees them, how they interact with other things, and how they navigate the world with that. And that's just to say that there are many ways in order to explore femininity and females and female characters. If you look at Joey, she has none of these issues. Joey is just a tomboy. Joey has too much agency. Let's be real. She's jumping out windows at the police station when she really should not be. But you make mistakes when you have agency. It's just part of being a human. But there are so many different ways to explore relationships of people with others, relationships with society, and emotions. So I know this kind of got all over the place. We got some stuff about dark romance, about some emotional damage, what inspires women to like dark romance or what draws people to dark romance, and then how women view themselves, and does that contribute to any of the types of things that people read or what they're drawn to. I hope that this kind of gives a good starting point to have some discussions on some of these topics. I think it's super interesting, and I hope that if you are a writer or a creator of some kind and you're working on trying to develop stronger female characters, this kind of gives a look into many different aspects to observe in building your character. And this doesn't have to apply to every single character. I have my own experiences with being a female and femininity and where I'm at in life and how I interact with other people. And you don't know how many people assume that I am not born female. Why? The name Ian throws a lot of people off. Honestly, that's part of it. I've always been drawn to kind of playing with gender. I have Kaylee, who is a super masculine man. I have Kelly, who is a male character in Dead End Drive. I have Blake, who is a female character in Boom. I have Joey, who's a female character. I have, there's Mary in Creatures Lie here. I do a lot. I have a male character that was in I haven't figured out what to freaking do with him or that story, but I have a male character named Alice, which is Aliss. Like, I have a tendency to gender swap names, and I don't know why. It's just always been that way. And androgyny has always been something that I've played with. But so I have a very different relationship with gender because of the way that I interact with others and how others interact or perceive me. And it's very interesting. Quite honestly. Some people really can't handle names or nicknames. Let's be real. And then that comes into somebody's story if it's something that bothers them. Fortunately, I know who I am. I know what I am. I may be slightly more obstinate than I probably need to be. But this is what it is. I think that psychology is incredibly important. I'm glad to be here and present this issue. I hope that this video was kind of balanced enough to just try to talk about this issue, because again, when it comes to talking about the differences in male and female psychology, in societal issues, in even just perceptions, because hey, all of these studies can be wrong. We can go and do another study and then see what kind of results we get. That is the whole point. But it's difficult to actually talk about the depths of character or the depths of people without being able to address this stuff and then talk about it reasonably. So I hope that it did not seem like, I know that I'm gonna straight up say it. I know that the words/phrase of objectification is such a loaded term, but I also think that it is a very interesting concept to discuss in a way. In the future, I'm going to talk about humiliation, because I feel like there is a huge humiliation culture, not just online, but in entertainment business, that is all about keeping people in line and denigrating people, entertaining yourselves by denigrating and humiliating, and creating a social pecking order by humiliating people. And so that's going to be a future video, because I think that humiliation and the use of humiliation as a control tactic, especially in communities or in occupations, is insanely interesting, and it's very rampant. So that'll be another thing in the future. There's also, I'm going to cover some stuff, like I mentioned earlier, about male psychology, because I think these discussions and getting your guys' comments down and below so that we can kind of look into all of this stuff can give better insight into how things operate or what we're seeing, because we all live different lives and we all have different experiences. And I think what causes the most disruption between the peace of our conversations is just a lack of understanding of how stuff is perceived. Because there's also this tendency that says, I perceive things this way, and because I perceive things this way, you must be wrong or you're calling me a liar. But it's much more complicated than that. We just live different lives. And that's what I want to get to here. Anyway, that's enough of the whatever apologetics here at the beginning. Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. Looking forward to the conversation. Hopefully, nothing vile. With that said, have a great weekend and don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out?
The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross.
Is he in trouble?
We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him.
Cross isn't a killer. For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Way. Why? Did you do that? To the left, plain black letters read along the wall. You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry, flickers black and black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?